Hello, welcome to the very special edition of the Roundtable. We are presenting a live broadcast for many participants and global media on Kintex, the venue of the Korea-Africa Summit meeting, and for our Arirang TV viewers. The 2024 Korea-Africa Summit kicked off today for a two-day run. This is the first time South Korea holds a summit with multiple African countries at the same time. In today's edition, we'll cover the landmark summit and the blueprint for the future that South Korea and Africa are drawing up together. South Korea and Africa may look distant from each other on the map if you only look at geography, but they built very strong and long relationship and partnership for the past 70 years. For the special edition of the Roundtable today, we have experts on Korea-Africa relations. First, we are joined by Professor Kimsuweon. Welcome to the Roundtable, Professor Kim.
Thank you for having me.
We are also joined by Dr. Chojoonhwa. Welcome.
Thank you.
We are also joined by Professor Rheelnbok. Welcome back to the Roundtable.
Thanks for having me.
This is the first multilateral summit meeting South Korea holds with some 40 African countries. So Professor Lee, I think we have to explain to our viewers the significance of the summit meeting that is being held in Seoul.
Right, so the 2024 Korea-Africa Summit is I believe, a very landmark event where the South Korean government is now trying to engage multiple African countries, both in a bilateral as well as a multilateral relationship. So this is not the first time that we have engaged Africa at high levels of dialogues. So starting from 2006, for example, we had Korea-Africa Forum, where we had high-level exchanges at the ministerial levels and below. And these type of forums with different regions have been in place, not just with Africa, but with Southeast Asia, with South Asia, Latin America, in the past 2 decades or so. But I believe this summit with Africa is, in that sense, very special because we are on top of the forum having these meetings at the highest level with now about 48 countries from the African continent participating in this event, with about 25 heads of states also present in Korea. So this will hopefully be a very opportune moment for us to really foster a deeper understanding and relationship between Korea and the continent as well as the individual countries, and try to think about a mutually beneficial future plans together.
Well, when you think of the number of countries in the African continent, which is 54, right? 48 countries participating in this summit meeting must be a very clear sign of huge success.
Right, so this is in fact the largest, I think, multilateral summit that Korea has ever hosted in Korea.
It is said the Korean War was the starting point for South Korea and Africa to forge precious relations. When the war broke out in 1950, African countries sent troops to fight along with South Korea against North Korea. Since then, the two sides have been solidifying their relations through various occasions. Firstly, Kim, would you briefly expand about the bilateral relations between South Korea and Africa that has been developed for the past 7 years?
Yeah, as you well just explained, in fact, it was Africa who first extended this hand of solidarity to Korea. But the initial engagement of Korea with Africa can be better understood in a framework of inter-Korean rivalry in search of international legitimacy in the United Nations setting. As we all know, the South and North Korea were not the members of United Nations.
Neither Korea was, right?
Yeah, both Koreas were not members. And on the other hand, African countries, right after their independence, they acquired this membership. So the 1960s, when most African countries started to get independent, was very important for South and North Korea, because now the United Nations became the battleground for the legitimacy of Korea. In the beginning, North Korea, in fact, outperformed South Korea in winning hearts and minds of African leaders via diplomatic activities such as establishing Juche Academy or inviting African students or gifting giant monuments across the African continent. But then after the accession to United Nations and after acquiring the membership of the United Nations, the diplomatic rivalry soon collapsed, unfortunately. But now the second re-engagement of Korea, South Korea, to Africa started in 2006. The Nomu현 government started South Korea's Initiative for African Development, which is now leading to the current the first ever Korea-Africa Summit. And in 2018, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in South Africa also established the Korea-Africa Foundation, which has been playing a very important role.
It's a long and rich history, right?
Yes.
Since the days of the Korean War and the Cold War. As an old person, I remember the rivalry between the two Koreas to capture the hearts and minds of African countries during the Cold War period in 60s and 70s. So, Dr. Cho, the observers are closely watching what agenda the summit meeting will be examining and hoping to achieve. So, could you explain some of the events we need to pay attention to?
Yeah, actually, over the last 3 weeks, there were lots of events, such as...
It's been a busy week.
Yeah, Africa Film Festival, Africa Culture Festival, Africa Culture Ground, and Africa Day, which was celebrating for the establishment of OAU at that point of time, and now we call AU. And actually, one of my friends also sent Kakao photo about the Korean and Africa Summit in Seoul on the road for the flag. And actually, I was lucky for invited for the Africa Day and Africa Culture Festival, and then I'm sure that now Korean citizens are much more interested in Africa more than before.
I see.
And from today to tomorrow, there are 13 events are supposed to be held by ministries and agencies and private agencies as well, such as agricultural conference on oceans and fisheries, and infrastructure forum, and so on, extra and extra. But I would like to highlight Korean and Africa Business Summit, which is supposed to be held tomorrow. And for both Korean and African companies are supposed to attend together. And then I'm expected what they are going to bring us, some kind of new project that we can work together. So I think I would like to highlight that summit if we are following up the Korean and Africa Summit.
The Korea-Africa Summit meeting is not just for the meetings between South Korean government officials and African dignitaries participating in the summit meeting, but it has far more events.
Yes, it is. Right. So there will be political agenda will be discussed at the head of state level. At the same time, there are much more engagement among the private companies as well.
I see.
Yeah.
Before discussing examining South Korea's cooperation with Africa, let's look at the rise of Africa in today's world. Let's take a look at a video clip and go into details.
Africa is a young, dynamic continent with a bright future. Africa is the youngest continent in the world, as 60% of its population are those who are 25 years old or younger. The African population is predicted to continue to grow and reach 2.5 billion by 2050. In other words, 1 in 3 young people in the world would be African. As an enormous single market with the GDP of $3.4 trillion, Africa is emerging as a new growth engine for the global economy. Africa is rich in natural resources. Africa holds 30% of the world's reserves of minerals such as cobalt, lithium, and manganese. The number of tourists heading to Africa is also surging. Africa is emerging as the world's largest consumer market, with its growing population, abundant natural resources, and large growth potentials.
The African continent's dynamic change is expected to greatly help the growth of partnership between South Korea and Africa. Professor Kim, the thing that really captured my attention in the video clip is the population, that 1 in every 3 young people exist in Africa. So Africa represents youth, right?
Yes.
Young population, which is in contrast to South Korea today. South Korea has been dealing with a rapid population decline with the plunging fertility rates, and which leads to the aging society. So how about Africa? Isn't it the world's youngest continent with a growing population? What does it mean to South Korea and the world?
Okay, very good question, thank you. Africa's median age is under 19.
Under 19.
Median age is the age that is at the midpoint, which means half of the population is older than that age, and the other half is younger that age. I just said Africa, on average, the median age is 19. Korea's median age is, surprisingly, 44.5.
44.5.
So now we can compare it. That youth, that high youth population also comes with high level of fertility. So a country called Niger, which has the youngest median age, which is 14.7, has the highest fertility rate, which is just below 7. There is a concept that I like to share with you called a demographic dividend. That is the opportunity that a country can have in which a larger size of working population get to support smaller size of children. In Korea, we had the benefit of demographic dividend in the 1960s and 1970s. And Africa will soon reach the point that Africa can get benefited from it. But that demographic dividend should come with increase in jobs and increase in food. So I can say Africa is now standing at crossroads of unprecedented opportunities and daunting challenges as well.
Professor Rhee, I believe that we talked about this issue in last week's segment of the program about Africa rising in the world economy. What is the correlation between Africa's population and economic development potential?
So I think Professor Kim mentioned and explained the overall situation very well. But in the broader picture, I think examining the correlation between the growth of population, especially the young population, and its prospects for economic development can be a little bit more complex. At least it's a little bit more of a conditional relationship, I would say. Because as Professor Kim mentioned, when we have this demographic dividend, it means that we have a larger working population who can support the kind of the dependent part of the population, so we can have a greater economic productivity as a whole in the labor market. At the same time, that is going to be conditional upon having an educated, skilled labor force that can actually generate a productive capacity to foster economic development. And that is going to be at least partially challenging. So, for example, you will need to have substantial amount of investment into education in order to make sure that the young population can actually reap the benefits of such demographic dividend. Investments into, public health, overall infrastructure will also be very important. And especially with the growing population, we're also seeing greater pressure to urban areas. So many people are rapidly moving into the cities, but the basic infrastructure in the city is still very limited. Mm-hmm. So how you will be able to actually handle such population pressure in the cities with the limited infrastructure and high levels of unemployment. I think these will be broader challenges that the different countries in the continent will have to face. In addition to that, as a political scientist, I think another important aspect to consider is how much you can bring the voice and representation for the young population as well. I mean, if you can bring the young population into the broader political discourse, then this will be great in the sense that there will be innovative ideas, the youth energy, the dynamism, and so on and so forth. But if you fail to actually have that level of youth representation while you have a broad and growing youth population, then this could easily be linked with potential political instability as well. So meeting these challenges, I think, highlight that the changes and the rapidly growing the population in sub-Saharan Africa as a whole can present both opportunities and potential difficulties. Mm-hmm. And I think this is especially the area where hopefully international cooperation and collaboration, for example, in the venues like this in the Korea-African Summit, can hopefully be bringing something that can be helpful for both parties. So as mentioned earlier, we in South Korea, for example, have an aging population. We have a rapidly shrinking population, if you will, especially in the more labor productive sort of the proportion of the age structure. So how we could probably meet the needs of two different parties. Maybe we can collaborate a little bit more so that there can be greater opportunities both for the countries in Africa as well as for South Korea as well.
I see. Dr. Cho, alongside with the young and growing population, African countries are also endowed with another excellent growth potential, which is natural resources. Would you like to explain how the natural resources would help economic development of Africa and how South Korea can forge a partnership with these countries?
As you can see the video clip, I would say Africa is a continent of natural resources. Mm-hmm. Right. We make a joke that what they don't have in their continent, right. Which is very big, right. Literally very huge. So when it comes to the oil, Africa has 7% of the oil in the world, and Libya and Nigeria is the major countries that produce and having oil, and 7 African countries are a member of OPEC as well. Right. And when it comes to the natural gas, and they have 40% of natural gas, and Mozambique is the major country that South Korea is also working with Mozambique in terms of the gas. And when it comes to the mineral resources, they have 30% of mineral resources, mainly South Africa and Nigeria and DR Congo. And under the current situation that supply chain competition, the mineral resources is very important in order for making secondary battery that South Korea major companies are driving on. So for Korea, cobalt, 30% of cobalt we are importing from the DR Congo. So by taking this advantage of the summit meeting, I hope that both parties for South Korea and Africa countries to cooperate when it comes to the natural resources through the win-win strategy in order to get benefit both parties.
I see. Professor Rhee, this explains why United States and China, two major powerhouses in global economy, are competing to capture the market and natural resources, as well as a young population in the continent of Africa. What about South Korea? South Korea does not want to be in the sidelines in this competition?
So
This is such a golden opportunity, right?
right, the golden opportunity, as you say, is in front of us. At the same time, what we have to offer, what we actually have in our hands to offer to the potential partners in the African continent, I think is a little bit more complicated. You mentioned the United States and China, or we can also think about European countries as well. They have a longer history of engagement with different countries in Africa. They have potentially a larger economic market, potential benefits to trade, higher levels of foreign aid or FDI, foreign direct investments. So if we're thinking about the sort of the traditional terms in terms of what kind of potentially material benefits we can promise to, say, the participants of the Korea-Africa Summit, I think what we have to offer is potentially a little bit more limited compared to the other sort of big powers. That is not to say that there's no sort of advantage, if you will, that we have in South Korea. And I think that mainly really comes from the shared experience and hopefully some deeper mutual understanding that we can foster together. So in one of the videos earlier, there were mentionings about the Korean War, for instance. But we do have unlike many of the traditional donors in the West, we do have shared experience of going through colonialism, foreign occupation, civil war, rebuilding a post-conflict war-torn nation from rubbles of the war and poverty, going through an extended period of non-democratic politics, then successfully transitioning into a successful democratic and well-developed country. I think these are the things that can sort of inspire the ordinary Africans, and hopefully that could be an asset for us in seeking cooperation with these countries that are attending the summit. And to do so, I think one of the most important things maybe is not necessarily focus on the kind of the short-term immediate benefits that we can pursue, but having hopefully a longer-term vision of how we can try to establish and further develop this relationship based on shared respect and maybe some humility on both parts. When I was studying in the US, for example, oftentimes I would hear something like, all Asians look the same. So we also have this experience of sort of challenges, different stereotypes, different prejudices. And at the same time, knowingly or not knowingly, sometimes we also exhibit something similar when we are dealing with people from other countries as well. So how we could try to recognize such potential stereotypes or prejudices, and then based on some recognition, how we could then try to really foster a better relationship based on an equal footing and better understanding, I think will be one of the important stepping stones for us to pursue a better relationship with the African countries. And I think that is the point where we actually do have some advantage or benefits compared to the larger powers around the world.
Professor Kim, Professor Rhee just mentioned the importance of South Koreans' interest and understanding of Africa as it is. It is reported that more and more South Koreans are making visits to Africa. What do you think of this trend?
Well, in short, I found it a very positive. Tourism is very important. It's increasingly more important. 5% of global GDP is in fact comes from tourism, and annually about 1 billion people cross borders for traveling. Last year, 13,000 Koreans visited Africa for a trip, and interestingly, 4 times of that, about 57,000 Africans visited Korea. Well, as Dr. Jo well explained, Africa is very rich in natural resources, not just minerals, but also the beautiful natural sceneries, ranging from savannas, desert, tropical forest, and believe it or not, snow. And Africa is also very rich in cultural heritage. Many people would know that the world's oldest library is in Timbuktu in Mali. Well, if if I have a time, I had my own experience of traveling when I lived in Cape Town, South Africa. Professor Lee talked about the urbanization and the stretched infrastructure. Infrastructure still matters. I'm not saying Africa is the ideal dream destination. We have to have our own share of suffering. So infrastructure matters. So instead of riding in a tourist limo, we had there's a tourist program called trucking. Yeah, this is a truck renovated with roof. So tourists get in a truck and we do the traveling. I started from Victoria Falls in Zambia and took a light flight, like aircraft, to Okavango Delta in Botswana and all the way to desert in Namibia, where the desert meets ocean, which is very rare. In fact, that trip was accompanied by 12 of my parents' friends, and they still recall the trip as their best trip of their life.
So, I mean, you really made me want to punch your airline tickets to make a visit to Africa this summer. But
Please do.
So South Korea is moving closer and closer to Africa. What about Africa? Is Africa coming closer and closer to South Korea? How about Africa's interest in South Korea these days?
Yeah, since I used to live in Cape Town, South Africa for more than a decade. I was able to experience the change of the awareness of Korea in Africa. And last year, I got to have a talk with a radio DJ in South Africa, and he shared his anecdote of his first encounter with Koreanness, which was Psy. And he said, when the radio industry first listened to and watched Psy's video, they were like, what is it? Is it a real song or is it a gimmick? Can we really play it? But now, he said, now his radio show is running a program which gets call-in from elementary school kids. And the school kids can request a song, and in response, they can get free snack, the whole kids of the school. And he added, nowadays, most frequently, the song request is K-pop. So he said, K-pop is the sweet spot of the little kids in South Africa. But it is just a song, but when it comes to good image of Korea, the same radio DJ recalled when he was young, he is a guy in his mid-50s. When South Africans think of Asian excellence, they used to think of Taiwan. But nowadays, the synonym of Asian excellence is Korea. But what is even more interesting to me, and I think what is even more important, is not just a simple image, but more of the attitude of Africans toward Korea. Now, thanks to the internet, they first found Korea, benign, positive, advanced country, and they searched it on the internet. And they soon learned that Korea went through the hardship of colonialism, civil war, family torn apart, authoritarian oppression. And in the process, they, there's a Korea, which I thought just one advanced country, but in fact, it was like us. Korea was also global south. And you were there with like us, now you're up there, you made us proud. So I could even sense this growing sense of solidarity, which I found very interesting and important.
Growing sense of solidarity between South Korea and African countries. Dr. Cho, as Professor Kim well explained that, promotion of economic interest is important and diplomatic ties are important, but for long-term partnership, you have to have a trust and positive image with each other. So could you explain to our viewers more about the importance of the people-to-people exchanges at the civilian levels between South Korea and African countries?
Yeah, actually, whenever I visit Africa several times, there are more Korean and Africa civil exchanges are more active than I expected and anticipated. And actually, I'm happy to use my expertise for giving the tour, for helping my two friends honeymoon to Mauritius and Kenya. And actually, most my friends got to know more interest in Africa more than before. But I would like to emphasize when it comes to the exchange, which is very important, but I would like to emphasize academic or educational exchange is also very important that we need to focus on, because educational, now that the Korean government is supporting for African countries for scholarships and civil servants for their master's degree in Korea. And that kind of educational linkage, I would say, that can pave a way for the ground to build trust relations between Korea and Africa. As Professor Kim said, that can be the basic ingredients for growing and making solidarity between Korea and Africa. So I think the educational linkage or educational exchanges or academic exchanges, we need to more focus on, and we need to more support.
I see. Africa is loaded with enormous growth potential. It appears that many African countries concentrate their effort in developing the ICT and AI industries. We examine the rapid development of digital industry in Africa and the business opportunities it creates for South Koreans. Please take a look.
The most energetic and trendiest sector in the world. It is the digital industry of Africa, which remains an untapped market. The World Bank assessed that information and communications technology is a new locomotive for Africa's growth in the future. It is forecast that the ICT market in South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana will grow an annual average of 6.7%, indicating huge growth potentials. Equipped with its advanced IT technology, South Korea can export semiconductors, displays, and mobile phones. It can also forge and expand joint businesses in the areas of smart classes, e-governments, and startup assistance. In African countries, 70% of startup businesses are concentrated in ICT fields like software, data, and fintech. They are hailed as a new driving force for economic growth. South Korean startups have produced remarkable results in the ICT sector through pursuing mutual benefits and win-win strategies, local communities, and creating jobs for young people. Based on their know-how and experiences, Korean startups will be able to expand cooperation and business opportunities with Africa. While maintaining diplomatic ties with 54 African countries, South Korea has established cooperative relations with them in diverse fields from trade to investment. As partners standing on an equal footing, South Korea and Africa will build together a future of joint growth, sustainability, and solidarity.
This is not surprising considering the latest global technology trends and Africa's young population we examined. Professor Rhee, could you tell us more about Africa's digital transformation? This is very impressive.
Right. So with the young population who have been growing up from the early childhood with access to smartphones, to the internet, everyday usage of, say, like social media, like WhatsApp, Instagram, and so on, Africa has a young population that is tech savvy, and this leads to this potential of having a sort of potential broader advancement in AI or digital technologies. So, as mentioned in one of the earlier broadcasts last week, when we think about Africa, as Professor Kim mentioned, there's all these like natural beauties and tourist attractions that we can typically think about. there are also these like higher levels of advanced technology that we don't necessarily see in other places that easily, like mobile payment systems, for instance. Or you have these like very urban like skyscrapers and young people carrying 2 or 3 smartphones and so on. So I think opening up our eyes to these potentials for thinking about the relationship between Korea and Africa is also going to be very important. I've looked at some of the sort of noteworthy examples of the leaders in digital technology in sub-Saharan Africa. For example, South Africa has like leading companies in AI-driven health. Nigeria also has a very vibrant AI ecosystem, as well as Kenya with its Silicon Savannah, talking about iHub, all these tech startups. Ghana has Google AI Lab that's going through all these research in the continent. So there's a lot of opportunities for innovations in technology and sort of digital industry involving things like fintech, agri-tech, health tech, and so on and so forth. And many of the leading global technology firms like Google, like Facebook, now called Meta here, or X, Twitter, all these companies are increasing their sort of foothold in different countries around the continent. And given South Korea's sort of advancement in our own digital technologies and our interest in innovation, I think thinking about better opportunities to collaborate and to really tap into this young potential in the African continent can be also an important opportunity for us to think about mutual benefits in the future.
I see. Thanks to the ICT industry's growth, research and development of artificial intelligence are gaining momentum in Africa. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa reports that it is necessary for African countries to utilize AI to the fullest through active assistance programs and robust infrastructure building by their governments. Dr. Cho, how strong is the AI industry in general in Africa, and what is its unique strength?
Actually, the Professor Lee explained very well. We probably have an image of the nature of Africa, in a beautiful Africa, and in a negative way. But actually, when you go to the Africa, they just use AI or applications as we do use in Korea in daily life. So the African government at the moment want to offer their countries as a test bed for those who are interested in implementing their programs, or they're launching their programs, such kind of things. As Professor Lee mentioned, global-wise leading companies like Google and those kind of things. So for instance, in Rwanda, Rwanda is keen on active on drone companies. And likewise in Kenya, they built Konja City for gathering lots of AI based industry companies or startups. So which means Africa itself aware of importance of AI technology and science, and they need some kind of experienced experts from probably Korea, which is very strong experience. So we can go to Africa in order to testimony for their program in Africa countries, and which can help Africa's transforming economy and enhancing governance such, and in combating poverty as well.
Professor Kim, South Korea happens to be one of the global leaders in AI and digital industries, right? So South Korea must be, target of African countries. I mean, African countries must be very much interested in joining hands with South Korea.
Yeah. Yes, and it's interesting because our historic experience is now being an advantage of our digital engagement with Africa. Because as much as Africa is reaping benefit of increasing digitalization, Africa is also very sensitive with the potential of data colonialism and data grab. AI is defined by data. And data is the collection of human experience and human behaviors. And that's where the Korea's strength can come from. Our data, our experience is sharing the same experience with Africa. Let me just take an example of food shortage. As we said earlier, growing population and the food insecurity issue is a problem, and World Food Program often cites Korea as a successful case of overcoming hunger within a generation, which means we are still living with the living memories of being hungry. But at the same time, now Korea being an advanced country, now we care and we work more on bigger global issues such as global climate change. Africa as a continent has long been a carbon net sink, which means Africa stored more carbon than it emitted. But since 2010, Africa also has turned to carbon emitting area.
I see.
But interestingly, it's not mainly from fossil fuel burning, but it's from change of land use for agriculture and livestock farming, which is necessary to address food security. There, at this point, Korea's experience and Korea's technology can be very useful. We have a group of agricultural engineers in Jeonbuk National University who's developing the world's first blockchain technology that can trace carbon in agricultural products and livestock such as cattle. And this, our digital technology, based on our experience, can be good benefit to continents of Africa.
The more I heard your explanations about the potential areas of cooperation between the two parties and their historical backgrounds, there are a lot of common backgrounds. Like South Korea used to be a colony of the imperial power, but South Korea used to be a very poor country, overcoming food shortage, but engage in rapid industrialization. So South Korea must have this abundant ability to put itself in African countries' shoes and provide very pragmatic and applicable, assistance and guidance as well, right? Well, beside the IT and AI sectors, South Korea has advanced infrastructure technology as well, which is attributed to the accumulation of experience from its rapid industrialization, dubbed as the miracle of the Han River. Professor Rhee, Africa needs to build more power grids, water pipes, fiber optic cables for internet access for the sustainable development of its IAA and information technology. But at the same time, from the general picture of industrialization, infrastructure building must be done for these countries. Is there any business opportunity or area of cooperation that South Korea can be active?
Right, so when we think about the Korean development experience or thinking about the miracle of Han River, often people focus on the industrial policies, like making these large corporations and creating new industries like shipbuilding, automobile. But a very important part of all of that was, as you mentioned, sort of strategic investment into infrastructure that can support the economic growth that Korea was going through. And I think in that sense, we do have the experience and the history of making these strategic choices and going through the actual implementation of these projects that can potentially be something that we can help share with countries that may be interested in learning from these experiences. And some of the notable areas where we could potentially try to focus more on would include things like energy grids, as you mentioned, or things like water systems, internet connectivity, which are things that we have done pretty well and which seems to be in demand and need from the perspective of at least some of the African countries. For example, just last year, I was in fact in Cape Town in South Africa and was fortunately staying, at least for the part of the trip, in a pretty fancy hotel. And still, the electricity was going off in the significant portions of the day, and the water was being shut down because the country was going through load shedding. And it's not necessarily because they don't have the capacity to generate power in the first place, but the infrastructure to actually transport the energy generated all the way to different parts of the country is very antiquated and not functioning properly, and significant investment has not been constantly made to do the maintenance. And we're talking about South Africa, which is one of the more economically developed countries in the continent. So oftentimes when we think about investments into these or development assistance into sectors like energy, we tend to think more about things that look a little bit more innovative, look a little bit more easy to sell, so to speak, like new technologies, solar power, like renewable energies. But one very important part that we need to recognize is the strengths that South Korea has in the traditional infrastructure part. And I think that is one of the areas where we do have some things that we may be able to offer to the countries that are participating in the summit. And of course, though, I have to mention that the government's role, South Korean government's role in trying to pursue these opportunities should mostly be in the form of providing the right incentives for the private entities in Korea to participate in a in the market in the way that makes free market sense, instead of having more of a kind of a top-down approach to this, and carefully thinking about how we can create these opportunities so that the initial startup costs can be at least a little bit subsidized or incentivized by the government, so that it can lead to a longer-term collaboration. I think will be a key in thinking about investments into these sectors.
Great. An African proverb goes, "Hold a true friend with both hands." It is hoped that this ongoing summit will be a major stepping stone for South Korea and African countries to become true friends, contributing to each other's development. This has been a special issue of the Roundtable. Professor Kim, Dr. Cho, and Professor Rhee, thank you so much for sharing your analysis and insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
We'll be back next week with more issues in global affairs. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.